Hello Internet, my name is Robbie Hyde and I am going to be showing you how to connect a Niagara 4 station to a Node-Red flow. Today my Node-Red flow is running on an Ubuntu server and my Niagara 4 station is running on a Jace 8000, just like the one you see here. This is a pretty high level tutorial video, so it assumes you already know how to get Node-Red up and running. If you don't, you can go to this website, node-red.org, and check it out. It'll run on pretty much anything you can dream up. And this tutorial also assumes that you already have a Niagara 4 station running, whether that's on a Jace or some other system. The data protocol that we're going to use today to connect Node-Red to the Niagara 4 station running on a Jace is oBIX, the Open Building Information Exchange. And so let's get into it. When you first get Node-Red installed and get logged into the editor, it looks like this, and we will come back to this in just a second. But for right now, let's dig into our workbench tool, which is how we're going to make modifications to our Niagara 4 station. So I'm going to get connected to this Niagara 4 station, which is a chiller controller running on a Jace 8000. Let's get connected here. Okay, now that we're connected, the first thing we're going to need to do is make sure that HTTPS is enabled. oBIX in Niagara 4 requires HTTPS. So in our station, under config, let me close this palette for a second here. Config services, we will find web service, and I'm going to right click on it and go to views AX property sheet. And here on the AX property sheet of the web service, I can see whether or not HTTPS is enabled. In this case, it's not. So let's turn it on. HTTPS needs to be enabled, and I can specify whatever port I want. So I'm going to specify 52345. Save. Okay, now that we've got HTTPS turned on, we need to add a driver. So in the station config drivers, we'll check and see, no, there's no oBIX driver in here. So I double clicked on drivers to bring up the driver manager, and I'll click on new and type to add. I'll scroll down to oBIX. oBIX network, there it is. Okay, you can name it whatever you like. I'm gonna leave it called oBIX network. Great. Now we've got the oBIX driver installed. And so what's next? Now we're gonna need a non-default authentication scheme. And what is that? Well, there are, under services in config here, authentication. There's an authentication service. In the authentication service, there are these authentication schemes. And by default, your Niagara 4 station is going to have a digest scheme and an AX digest scheme. But for oBIX, you're going to need one that's not by default in here. It's called the HTTP basic scheme, and the place you're going to get it is you're going to need to open up a palette and open a new palette, find the palette for Baja Niagara framework, and then inside of that palette, scroll down, let's look for authentication schemes, and then in authentication schemes for web services schemes, and then in there is HTTP basic scheme. And we're just going to drag that right on top of our authentication schemes here. And now we should have one more than we did before. Okay, so now that we've got this scheme in our authentication schemes in our authentication service, we're going to need to create a user that uses that scheme. And that user is going to need to have admin rights. So I'm just going to take the admin user and duplicate that user. And this is going to be our OBEX user. So I'm going to get real creative with a name and call it OBEX user. Now that we've got our OBEX user, I'm going to go into right click, views, AX property sheet for the OBEX user. And we need to check a couple of things in here. One of them is we're going to need to make sure that the role is admin. It should be, because I duplicated my admin user. We're going to need to set a password. So for me, I know I need to have 10 characters and some lowercase and some uppercase. So I'm going to do OBEX all lowercase and then password all uppercase, password, and then I need some numbers too. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll do that again down here. All lowercase OBEX, OBIX, all uppercase password, and the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not a good password. I'm just using that to give this tutorial. Okay, and then now we've set a password. We've checked that there's an admin role for this user. And last, we need to go to this authentication scheme and make sure that's set to HTTP basic scheme. Okay, we'll save this user. Okay. At this point, we have done everything we needed to do in Niagara 4 to get Node-Red to be able to talk to this Niagara 4 station. So let's just pick a data point in my station that we would like to pull out and get into Node-Red. I'm gonna go into, there's a this is a chiller with a couple of turbo core compressors. So I'm going to go into this compressor number 1, and look at its points folder and pick something like suction pressure. And I'm going to double click on that so I can see, what do we got? We got a 42.7 pound suction pressure right now. I can click this little pencil up here and see the ORD or the slot as editable text. And so what I'm going to need is everything after slot colon. So starting with this first slash, that's what I'm going to need. I'm just going to copy that. And then let's go over to our browser with Node-Red running. Okay, now that we've got our Niagara 4 station set up to accept a OBEX connection, now let's get Node-Red to connect to the Niagara 4 station. The first thing we're going to need is an inject node, and that's going to set things off for us. And the way we're going to ask Node-Red to communicate to the JACE is through an HTTP request. And if I double click on the HTTP request, I can change the method to set by message.method, and that's what we're going to do. And everything else we will just load into a function. And let's get started on that function. So we're going to need to assign some variables. So let's do that. What are the variables that we're going to need to be able to ask Node-Red to log into the Niagara 4 station? Well, it's going to need a username, and our username was OBEX user, and then we're going to need a password, and our password was OBEX password 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to need to know the IP address of the Niagara 4 station. In my case, that's this. And we're going to need to know the HTTPS port number, which for me was 52345. And okay, now that we've got that, we are going to need to hash our username and our password together in base 64. we're going to create a base 64 digest. And here's one way to do that. We'll create a new variable called auth hash, and we'll set it to be equal to a buffer from our username. We're going to need a colon in quotes, and our password, toString in quote base 64 semicolon. Okay, so that auth hash variable is going to be putting together our username and our password with a colon and then converting it into base 64. And that's how we're going to send the username and password over to the Jace. That's how it's going to authenticate that this user has permission. What else are we going to need? We are going to need to know what the actual point is that we want to pull data from. In the Niagara world, that's called an ORD. And I'm going to use the term ORD slot. And so the specific slot that we wanted, is it still in my clipboard? There it is this one. Slash drivers slash modbus TCP network slash turbocore 1 slash point slash DTC 1 slash suction underscore pressure. And if I do that, I will get the number. I will also get the facets or the unit, which is PSI, and I'll also get the status, which is okay or stale or faulted. I just want the value. I just want the number. So if I specify the slot out slash value, I'll get just the number. And so that's going to be the ORD or the slot that I want. Okay, now what we need to do is, I'll leave myself a little comment. What data do I want to pull out of the Niagara station? And then now we got to create the method, create the message for the GET request. And so here's where we're going to say message is equal to open curly brackets method method is get. The URL is HTTPS : I'm going to add my IP address from the variable I created above, and I need a colon, so colon, and then I'm going to add my HTTPS port, and then I'm going to need /OBIX /config plus my ORD slot. And I also have some request headers that I need to specify. So headers, open curly brackets, authorization is basic plus my auth hash. And you'll notice I put a space after basic before I close the quotes. Basic and auth hash. And then I'm going to accept anything. Okay. And so then we can close those curly brackets, and then we need, after this one, we need a semicolon. Okay, and if we just leave this like this, we're going to get an SSL cert expired error. And so we'll ignore cert expired error with message dot reject unauthorized equals false. Okay, and we'll return the message. That is our function, and I'll call it get request. So our function contained our username, our password, our user's password, the IP address of the JACE, the HTTPS port we want to connect on. Then we took the username and password and we made them into a base 64 hash. Then we specified the actual data point that we would like to get out of Niagara and into Node-Red. And then we put this message together that used all that information, a get request from the URL that is HTTPS plus this IP address, so it would pull this number in, plus the HTTPS port, which will pull this number in, then plus oBIX / config plus the ORD slot, which will pull all of this in. Okay, and so now you would only need to ever edit what's up here, and you could reuse this function block if you wanted to. There's a lot of ways to do this in Node-Red. I just wanted to make one simple function block. Okay, so let's just test this. Let's say done. Then we're gonna need to link our inject node to our get request, and we're gonna inject. We're gonna link that function to our HTTP request node. Now, when we run this, we're gonna want to see what happens. So let's pull a debug node out, and let's link our HTTP request into our debug node. Now, we need to click deploy. We want to make sure we're on the debug pane, which is this guy here, debug messages, and then we'll hit this inject. And we see it's requesting, and then here's the response back from that request. And you can see that it starts with what it is, XML version. And this can be a hard way to look at this, especially in the debug window on Node-Red. So there's a way for us to parse it. And if we come down in the nodes, there's a parser for XML here. So we'll just take the HTTP request and we'll wire that into the XML parser. And then we'll take the output of the parser and put that into the debug node. And we'll deploy this, and then we'll run clear my debug window messages, and then hit this inject node again. Okay, and so now what I'm getting is a single object that contains a real with an object, and in that object is a value known as $, containing an object with all of this. So value, and then href, display name, unit. Unit is OBEX, units pounds per square inch. So I was able to get the facets out in this way, but I was also able to get the value, which right now says it's 42.304. Let's switch back to Workbench and look at our suction pressure, and 42.7. And then we'll go back to our Node-Red flow and hit the inject again, and see if we're close to 42.7, real $, value 42.8. And so now maybe what we want is to just pull out this value. We can copy the path right here, copy path. And there's a number of ways to do this, but I'm going to do this with another function. So let's take another function here, and I'm going to take the XML out of the parser, or I'm going to take a link out of the XML parser and into the function, and then let's go into the function. And I'm creating suction pressure. So let's call it suction pressure, and let's say it's equal to message dot, and then I'm going to paste payload dot real dot $ dot value. Now I might get 3 or 4 or 8 decimal points from that, and maybe I want to limit the number of decimal points. So I'll parse float of this, and then I'll set it to fixed, and I'll say I just want 1 decimal point. And then if I wanted units, I could say right here plus quote PSI. And then I could set this function block's message.payload to be equal to suction pressure and say done. Okay. And then we'll take our debug and we'll link it from here. And so I'm going to call this function suction pressure. Suction PSI. I have a typo here. So that was supposed to say payload done. And clean up my debug window and hit my inject node. And there we go, 42.4 PSI. And toggle back to workbench, 42.4 PSI. Okay. Okay, at this point, I'm going to show you 2 ways to be able to see the value of the data point that we've now got coming through oBIX from Niagara into Node-Red. One of them is to show it here on this editor, which would be using node status. And so right in my suction PSI function, I'll just use node.status and ask for suction pressure like that. And so say done and say deploy. And now when I hit the inject node, in addition to seeing it here in the debug window, because I've got this debug node, I'll also see it here just underneath the function node. That's the ability of using the node status. And so I'll add on top of that a dashboard. A dashboard can be a really fast way for you to see a lot of information. The dashboard isn't included by default, so you got to go to this this pane here in the side. Maybe I went too fast. If you come over here, it's manage palette, and then you switch to install and just search for dashboard. I've already got it installed, but here it is, Node-Red dashboard. And so when it's installed, you'll have these extra nodes down here in the bottom. And so I'm gonna grab this gauge node, and then we'll wire the suction pressure into the gauge, and then we've got to make some configuration for the gauge. Because I've never used the dashboard, I'm gonna need to create a UI group. A UI group would be like a tab. It looks like I've got one already for Chiller 6, and so maybe I'm gonna call these pressures. Add. Okay, and then this gauge is going to be suction pressure. And the units is PSI. Let's say the range is from 0 to 100, and that I'm in green from 0 to 50. And in yellow from 50 to 60, and in red from 60 to 100. And I'll label it suction pressure. Okay. And so now when I hit deploy, now I've got that value when I hit inject showing up here in the debug window, because I've got a debug node. I've got it showing up here right underneath the function node because it's in node.status. And then I'm also got it going out to a dashboard. How do you get to this dashboard? I'm just going to duplicate this tab that the Node-Red editor is in, duplicate the tab, and then I'm going to take from the hashtag out, I'm just going to get rid of it and then put in its place the letters U and I. And so that'll bring up the UI, and now I see the suction pressure. And so the last thing would be to set it so that it's constantly updating that And we can do that at the inject node by setting an interval. We'll leave it to once a second and say deploy. And now I can see the pressure updating. I'm probably done with the debug node now, so I'll delete that. And now I've got my pressure showing up here on the editor, which will make Niagara programmers happy. And I've got it showing up here in the dashboard, which is kind of the Node-Red way of thinking about it. And that is it for this tutorial. And if you'd like to see more tutorials on how to make Node-Red do things like this, then give us a like and a subscribe, and stay tuned to see more useful system integration videos. Thanks for watching.